Welcome to the Cinematologists podcast. I'm Dario Linares, and down the line, of course, is my good friend Dr. Neil Fox. Neil, how are you doing?
I'm really good, mate. How are you?
I'm not too bad at all. I'm very much looking forward to the series that we have got lined up, which we are calling Filmstock Extra. So these are extra bits of content which we are putting out on the main feed that come from recordings that we did at your Filmstock Festival in Luton.
That's right, yeah. We had such great conversations with Mike Carey, Kieran and Jeanie Finlay. We wanted to give them some really prominent airtime on the main feed and let people enjoy the kind of the wisdom that those amazing filmmakers and writers shared with us.
So we're not going to go into a long extended discussion for these episodes, and there won't be an outro either. Each one will just go straight into the main body of the content. So what have we got lined up today?
On today's episode, it's my conversation with the writer and graphic novelist M.R. Carey, also known as Mike Carey, who talked about his work adapting The Girl with All the Gifts from his own book and his work as a graphic novelist and comic book writer.
Fantastic. So let's get straight into that now.
When we were talking about doing the festival again, and I've been podcasting for a few years, and part of my day job at Falmouth University has been kind of hosting guest speakers and kind of having these kind of conversations. I like these kind of career conversations, so I said let's make that a part of the festival. And Justin said we should definitely get Mike if we can, because he, I think he'd be great. And I didn't really know our guest's work. I'm talking a lot. I haven't introduced him. It's a bit weird. And then I watched the Girl with the Gifts and sort of did a little bit of research and thought, I really want to talk to our guest this evening, because I think it's going to be a really great chat. So thanks everyone for coming, and thank our guest, Mike Carey. So I wanted to start with just a kind of bit of context about Luton, really, and kind of what brought you to Luton in the first place.
So I come from Liverpool, and I lived in Liverpool until I was 19, and then I came south to go to university. I was at St Peter's College in Oxford, and I met a woman there in my first term who was from North London, who had lived her entire life within a 2-mile radius, Southgate, Foster's, Barn and Muswell Hill.
Well, that's where I studied at Middlesex.
Right, yeah. She lived about 100 metres from the Middlesex camp.
Wow.
And we just when we finished our degree and our doctorates and then our teacher training, we moved into a flat in North London. And I was applying to sixth form colleges in the southeast. Sixth form colleges because during my teacher training, I went to Stantonbury campus, and I think it's fair to say that the kids at Stantonbury chewed me up and spat me out. I found it kind of rough, and I decided I would try and go into the sixth form sector because it was less problematic from the point of view of discipline. I didn't have to be a tough guy, was the theory. So I applied to Hills Road and Long Road in Cambridge, a few other places, and Luton was one of them. At that time, Luton was just setting up communication studies as an A-level. So I walked in for a job in English. I applied for a job in English. I met Sally Leach, who was the head of communication, and she said, the successful applicant for this job will need to be able to teach communication studies. So I thought about that, and when we came to the any questions bit of the interview, I said, what does that mean, being able to teach communication studies? And she said, it basically just means saying yes. It's a weird interdisciplinary thing, with bits of social psychology and bits of media theory, and you'll love it. So I said, yeah, I'm really up for that, and I got the job. And the whole time I was teaching here, I was commuting from London.
So how long were you here, and have you got what were your kind of memories of your time sort of teaching Luton students?
I was here, so I did 2 stints. I was here from 85 to 90. Then I ran away to become an accountant in the same way that some people run away to join the circus. But that was on the mistaken belief that accountancy was a 9-to-5 job, where teaching was a 24/7 job. So I just thought I'd be able to write evenings and weekends. This did not prove to be the case. So I came back in 92 when Richard Evans who was acting head of English, took a sabbatical, and I took over some of his teaching load, and I ended up staying for another 5 years until '97, and I loved it. I think the college was changing a lot during that period. When I first started teaching at Luton, they had this absolutely wonderful thing called the Complementary Studies program. You had a teaching load that was 19, 20 hours, but 2 or 3 hours of that could be complementary studies, which meant you could teach 1 hour of anything at all that you liked. And students could just sign up for CS programs to fill out their timetables. They weren't examined, it was just come and do something interesting. So I used to teach complementary studies photography, which was brilliant. I loved the college, and I'm still friends with an awful lot of people who I taught with. We meet up regularly. I'm not part of the AFLUVICS, the group for former Luton Sixth Form College staff, but that's only because I don't like joining anything. But I still see loads of people who I used to teach with, and quite a few of my ex-students. I went to the 50th birthday party of a woman who was in my first ever English Lit class about 3 months ago. That was weird.
So you mentioned there kind of getting out of the 24/7 racket of teaching into accountancy, but then but then also writing is not that is a 24/7. So how and when are you kind of starting to write seriously, and what's your focus as you're kind of starting out as a writer?
I was always doing it. When I was doing my degree and my doctorate, I wrote a whole slew of really awful novels. That's probably one reason why I never actually got the doctorate. I used to write these huge, shapeless bags of story because nobody ever taught me how to structure a story, and I was too dumb to figure it out for myself. So I just my recipe for writing a novel was write chapter 1, make a cup of tea, come back, write chapter 2, rinse and repeat, and then when you get something that feels vaguely endy, write the end. So I did that quite a lot in my 20s. I would send these things to publishers and get rejection letters that would say things like, you should try writing this as a novel. But then, by the time I started at Luton, I was kind of giving up the abortive novel gig for an abortive comic book gig. It was Lynn, my wife, who said, an awful lot what you read for pleasure at the moment is comic books, so why didn't you try out for that instead? And I started doing comic book journalism. I wrote for a magazine called the Fantasy Advertiser, which was edited by Martin Skidmore, and for a few other sort of British fanzines. It wasn't a paying gig, it was just writing reviews and articles about comics. And then through that I began to meet comics editors, and I started to send them pitches. And around about the time when I left Luton the second time, I was starting to get paid work. Actually, I need to put the microphone down so I can do air quotes. Paid work. There were checks, they bounced, but there were checks. It was sort of paid work.
It's paying now. It's getting closer,
I did an adaptation of Dr. Faustus with Mike Perkins. I did a book called Inferno with Michael Gaydos. All very small, American small press, but nice production values. And I was sending everything that I had out, I was sending to DC. At that point, my favourite comic was The Sandman by Neil Gaiman, which I thought then, and still think now, completely redefined what you could do in long-form comic storytelling. It was an incredible piece of work. It was a novel told across 7 years worth of comics. So I was sending it to all the editors who were involved in Sandman. Everything I had out, I'd send them copies with a begging letter saying, please let me work for you, please let me work for you. And then one day I got a letter back from Elisa Whitney, who was the editor on Sandman for the last part of its run. And an awful lot of things sort of spun out of that. Through that I got the Lucifer gig, I got Petrofax, a whole bunch of Sandman Universe projects. I was an overnight success in 10 years.
like the best. So what's it like kind of, without being too rude, you're a little older in terms of like you're kind of settled into a career almost, and then you're also trying to do this incredibly other difficult, challenging, time-consuming career kind of on top. What was driving you to stick at it with the writing, because I think a lot of people would have just said, oh, I'll just draw for fun, or I'll write for fun, but you kind of are pursuing it past the time when people normally stop.
I think it was just something that I always did. Storytelling was a thing I loved, and for an awful long time it was just a hobby. It was just something I did because it was fun to do. And yeah, I sent stuff out to editors without any expectation that it would be picked up, and it sort of dawned on me quite gradually that it could be a career. But it was an itch I had to scratch. I guess that's why I kept at it. I was constantly sort of trying out different things, a little bit of short stories, novels, comics, screenwriting, journalism, and then later radio and games, and you find out what you can do by doing a ton of things that you can't do, and thinking, oh my god, that's awful. So I just, I was, there's an experiment you can do with flies and bees, which is quite cruel. If you catch a bunch of bees in a bottle, and you put the bottle in a window with the closed end of the bottle toward the light, and the neck of the bottle into a room, the bees will all die because they'll just go toward the light. If you do it with flies, they'll all escape because they just ricochet everywhere until they get out. I'm definitely a fly. I never had a plan. I never had a sense of direction. I just constantly went around bumping into things until I started bumping into the right things.
Mm. What did it feel like to be able to kind of have to stop doing the day job because this other career, this kind of lifelong passion, has become the career? How did that feel?
It was terrifying and exhilarating. I was lucky really because I had a very understanding boss at college in North West London, a guy named Mark Hill. And when I went to him and said I want to quit teaching to write comic, he laughed his leg off. He said, "Yeah, you're going to be back. You're going to be back sooner rather than later. I tell you what, I'm going to give you a sabbatical. Take a year, and the job's still open for you if you need to come back within a year," which was incredibly kind. In the end, it was problematic because he kept on calling me back in to teach classes that they couldn't get cover for. So it was a semi-sabbatical, but it was great to have the safety net.
Yeah.
Because the first month when I didn't get a paycheck, it felt like I just jumped over the edge of a cliff. It was, because in writing, you're kind of like you're a spider. You live by what comes out of you, and if you stop writing, you stop getting paid, and that can be terrifying, but it's worked out. I had a little bit of money saved, so I figured I could get back into teaching if I needed to. Even if the comics dried up straight away, I'd survive. I wouldn't starve. But I've never gone back. It's worked out.
There's another Luton connection that I wanted to sort of raise, because I imagine this is around this time, which is when some of you may know there was a comic book artist and a graphic novelist called Steve Dillon, who passed away a couple of years ago, who was a big figure locally. And we'd been asked at the festival, were we going to mark that, because obviously we're back, but it didn't necessarily feel right because it felt a bit tacked on. And then of course I said to Mike if he was aware of Steve's work, and you said that you'd actually kind of worked together on a couple of issues.
Yeah.
So I just wondered if just for the local audience again, just sort of share what that experience was like, and what Steve's work meant to you.
Well, Steve was one half of a partnership that defined the character John Constantine, the Hellblazer, working with Garth Ennis. I came onto Hellblazer many years after that, and Steve had left the book, but he came back. He came back just for 2 issues at the start of my run, and it was wonderful, because he was a legend, and here he was coming back to a character that he'd made iconic and sort of left his mark on. So the first 2 issues I did on Hellblazer, which brought the character John Constantine back from America. The writer before me on the book was Chris Brian Azzarello, the only American at that stage ever to write Constantine. He did not get the accent right, because Americans don't understand that there are multiple British accents. So sometimes John was Scouse, sometimes he was Brum, sometimes he was vaguely Irish. So I brought him back from America, and I thought, John's like me, he's a Scouser living in the south, so I took him back to Liverpool. So the 2 issues I did with Steve were set in Liverpool, and the sense of place is wonderful, and you look at it and you think, yeah, that's John Constantine, he's back. So it was a great start to my run, and he was a great collaborator. I think that there's two kinds of comic artists. There's people who are like flashy and impressive but can't tell a story, and then there are people who are just really, really good visual storytellers. And the reason I work with Peter Gross so much is because he's a writer, he's an artist of that second kind. His art is always in the service of the story. And I think that was true of Steve as well. Your eye was just drawn into his page and then carried along with the flow of the narrative.
Thank you. And then out of all that kind of early work comes Lucifer, which would you say that is the kind of defining kind of book that kind of leads to almost the second part of the work that leads to the second part of your career?
It was the first monthly comic book that I ever did, the first continuity comic book, and I wrote it for 6 years, more than 6 years. Neil Gaiman was creative consultant, and I'd already met him through the Sandman Presents stuff that I did. And when I pitched Lucifer as a monthly, I can remember a phone call I had with Neil where he said, "You really should do a monthly book, because the only way you can figure it out is by doing it. It's one of these things you only learn by doing." He said, you can't tell from the outside what a weird mix of planning and serendipity it is. And I said something like, "You can't tell me that Sandman wasn't planned meticulously from start to finish, because the last issue pays off stuff that you did in the first issue. It's all there, all the seeds are there." And he said, "Yeah, that's true, we knew where we were going, but you wouldn't believe how many things just happened because they happened, because you get a great idea along the way." And that's what Lucifer was for me. It was just like a glorious laboratory, a glorious classroom where I learned a ton of stuff about how to structure a story. And I said earlier that my novels in my 20s were just appalling. They were appalling because they had no shape. And with comics, to some extent, the shape is imposed from the outside, because your canvas has a fixed size. Each monthly issue is 20 pages or 22 pages. So you have to become a miser. You have to cost out every scene that you put in. And you have to think, does that scene need 3 pages, or can I squeeze it down into 2 and have a splash over there? So it forces you to think in a conscious way about structure. And coming out of that back into novels, you get drunk on the power, because a novel is as big or as small as you want it to be. You can literally, you can just sort of you can decide you're going to have a subplot that takes the main characters off for 3 chapters to Louisiana, which I did in one of the Castor books, and nobody's going to turn around and say no. So comics was a great way to sort of figure out a ton of stuff about storytelling. I sort of came out of Lucifer in a very different place than I went in.
So it's almost, that's like a kind of, like a school. You're getting schooled on all the things that are going to help you kind of do all the other kinds of writing that you end up doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a great discipline, I guess, it's building.
And of course it's collaborative. It's a very different form of storytelling than just straight prose. You're working with a team. You're working very closely with the penciler, less closely with the inker and the colorist and the letterer and so on. But it's also a great way, therefore, of sort of like figuring out different ways into story and negotiating story, breaking story with other people. Whereas sitting in a room with a keyboard, you can get into a rut. You can get sort of stuck into a habit of just always doing the same thing in the same way every time.
So, am I right in saying that Lucifer, the character that you kind of worked on, is that what became the TV show Lucifer? Loosely, kind of. The TV show draws more on Neil's work in Sandman than it does on my work in Lucifer, but really it's very, very tenuously connected to both of them. It's a police procedural that happens to have the Lucifer character in it, and it features characters from Sandman like Mazikeen, and characters from Lucifer like Amenadiel. But its relationship to our work it's off on a tangent. But I think any adaptation is reinvention. Yeah, that's what I was kind of asking. How you feel about that? Is that almost kind of like, is that a good thing that they kind of don't mess too closely, or how do you feel about that process when you see it being done?
I think it's an inevitable thing. I think whenever you adapt, you start by stripping the story down. I think you take it apart and you look at the pieces of it and you think, what are they doing? And then you put it together again in a way that works for a different medium, which is not going to be the same way that it worked in the original medium. One of the adaptations that I worked on was the comic book version of Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere. And we made all sorts of decisions on that sort of took it away from the TV series, but I think in ways that were respectful of the original and sort of made it more comic booky. Made it sort of fit for purpose in the comic book medium. Again, that's a great discipline for sort of making you sort of examine your own default options when you tell a story. Adaptation is something that I do whenever I get the chance, because I really just enjoy the process of translating a story across from one medium to another.
Great. And before we get into that, in terms of the girl with all the gifts as the kind of the case study, do you feel like there's been a shift in the process of adaptation of comic books in kind of film and television that seems more, not all, but seems like more interested in being faithful to the spirit, or trying to do that kind of honest work of respecting the source material and trying to translate it in a way that honours that?
No.
Good. Things get controversial.
I think what's happened is suddenly an awful lot of stuff that was restricted to the comic book medium has now become culturally mainstream. I don't think that's a matter of respect. I think it's a matter of market. It's that it's possible to do faithful adaptations of things like The Boys or The Avengers. And there's a mass audience for it, which probably would not have been the case 20 years ago. If you look back at the 60s Batman, charming as it is, it's played for laughs because you realise that there are conventions that you take for granted in comic books that don't make any sense at all when you take them out into another medium. He's a guy who dresses as a bat. So they played up the comedic aspects beautifully. But now you don't have to. Now you can do it straight. Now you can do superheroes acting. And
that kind of tongue-in-cheek, knowing, ironic approach is very rare now. They've kind of leaned really into the serious, and in a way that feels, like that they're missing something that was so formative in terms of like the original Batman and things like that.
Well, I'm a big fan of the Marvel Universe movies. I mean, I think the Avengers movies in particular have done a sort of magnificent job of managing a vast, complicated cast in a very, very elaborate world and doing it well, so that the emotional beats carry. I know Scorsese was talking recently about comic book movies and saying that as far as he was concerned, they were more like theme park rides than they were like cinema. And I sort of know what he means, but I disagree. I think the best comic book movies, the human drama is there at the heart of it. If you look at the relationship between Spider-Man and Iron Man, it works for me, and it affects me. But if you sort of then turn your eyes to some of the DC movies, and I say this as somebody who's written extensively for DC over the last nearly 20 years, some of those things, some of the Snyderverse movies are god awful because they're somber without really being serious. They affect seriousness, but actually they're just bananas.
So you don't want to release the Snyder Cut, that's what it's okay. All right. Was it just kind of drawing out that Marvel thing? Because what's interesting what you were saying in terms of the discipline of writing for comics and what Neil Gaiman was sort of talking about in terms of the monthly project. I can see in the Marvel thing what feels very different is that commitment to the long term, commitment to that. It feels like episodic storytelling in the way that they structure their films and then build everything around it. That's what I was sort of saying in terms of that. It feels like that approach understands what is so attractive and possible in comic books.
No, I think that's true. Yes. Well, one thing that comics always had, that the comic movies never had until the Marvel Universe came into being, was that kind of massive interconnectedness. There's a woman named Ross Cavaney who writes academic books about comics, and she said to me once, if you take the Marvel universe as a whole, the comics, it's the single biggest mythological text that the human race has ever produced. I think that's a really nice way of looking at it. And yeah, now suddenly, not that suddenly, it's taken 10 years, but Kevin Feige seems to have found a way to realise that kind of scope, that kind of scale in cinema.
Great. So let's move on to your own novel writing adaptation process with the Girl with All the Gifts, which was a book that you wrote and a screenplay that you wrote concurrently, I believe, which I think is is fascinating to me because it happens, but it's rare that that the book and the film are being developed at the same time, particularly for an independent project. Like you can see if something's been commissioned as something in a universe, you might get two things happening at the same time. But you writing a novel and writing a screenplay at the same time for this world it feels really interesting. So I just wondered if you could just talk about kind of developing the project and that process of kind of writing simultaneously.
I can talk endlessly about this topic, so please shut me up.
I needed it. I'll sit back.
This came out of a lot of serendipitous things happening at the same time. One of them was that the Castle novels didn't sell particularly well. My publishers liked me, but they couldn't sell me. And there was a period of time when they kept on throwing things at me. They'd say, the next big thing is going to be codes and conspiracy thrillers, so write like Dan Brown. So I wrote like Dan Brown, and people bought Dan Brown. And then they said, the next big thing is going to be body swaps, do a body swap thriller. And I started doing a body swap thriller, and I thought, this is silly, isn't it? So I set it aside, and for a couple of years I didn't do anything for the sort of mainstream, for the main Orbit imprint. What I did instead was I collaborated on two novels with my wife, Lynn, and our daughter, Louise. The first was our sort of like attempt to do a pastiche of the Arabian Nights. It was called Steel Seraglio in America, and it was called City of Silk and Steel in the UK. And then we did a second one, which was structurally similar. It was lots of embedded stories within stories, very playful narrative interweavings. And that was called House of War and Witness. So for over 2 years, I was working really closely with two women who were both writers themselves, had their own voices, which were different from my voice, and their own opinions. And there were two of them, only one of me. And the way we did it was we triangulated on a narrative voice that worked for all of us. And then we read sample chapters aloud to each other, and we argued it until we came to an idiom that we could all feel comfortable with. And I came out of that just like sensitized to stuff that I'd been doing without thinking about it, and kind of like ready to take risks, ready to try something different. And then I was invited to do a short story for an anthology. Tony Kellner and Charlene Harris, the Charlene Harris of True Blood, used to do these annual anthologies where the theme was always something really banal and everyday. Like one year it was family holidays, another year it was DIY. And the idea was you do a horror story or a dark fantasy story or a supernatural story built to that theme. And I said I would do it. And they said, great, the theme is school days. And I spent a few months kind of churning out bad knockoffs of Harry Potter. And then
you didn't tap into your Luton sixth form
strangely not. But then I went to Norway. I went to the Raptors convention in Norway. It was bitterly cold, and the heating in my hotel room broke down. So I actually spent a lot of the 4 days I was there cowering under a duvet with a laptop. And the idea of Melanie came to me, the idea of a little girl sitting in a classroom writing the essay that everybody writes 100 times during their school career, which is what I want to be when I grow up. But the twist is she's already, she's a zombie, she's one of the undead. Growing up is not an option for her. And that sort of image was what became the short story, Iphigenia and Alice. Terrible title, I think. And then I wrote the story, and I kind of couldn't put the character down. I kept on thinking about Melanie, I kept on thinking about that world. And so I kept on pitching it. Anyone who would stand still long enough, I would pitch it out. I pitched it to Anne Clark, who was my editor at Orbit, and I hadn't done anything at Orbit for quite a while. And Anne said, yeah, it's an interesting story, but I don't see where it becomes a novel. And I said, well, I'll do you a breakdown, and I did, and she said, yeah, all right, write a novel. And at the same time, I met Cammy Gatin, who was the lead producer on the movie, and I pitched it at her. And she knew Colin McCarthy, and Colin McCarthy had wanted for ages to do a movie that would use what he called ruin porn, like decayed urban sites, a movie that would be partly set in sort of like actual disused buildings, which are often incredibly beautiful in a weird way. So we all got together in a room, we all sort of plotted out the movie at the same time as I was writing the novel, and it was just fantastic. It was a really, really enjoyable experience. So they were both adaptations of the short in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you sort of say about the real buildings, because one of the most striking things about the film is that sense of place, which is so striking in the film.
Okay.
Yeah, go for
an
it.
example of that. The hospital, there's a sequence where they find their way into a hospital, they barricade themselves in, and then they have various sort of encounters when they're there. That's not only a real place, it's a real place that actually looks like that. There is zero set dressing, except for the stairwell there with all the furniture piled up in it. That was stuff that they brought. Everything else looked exactly the way it looks in real life. And it's right next door to a hospital that's still working. It's like they've moved out of the old building into the new one. And there are some traveller families who are allowed to graze their horses on the lawn outside the hospital. So while we were shooting, we were sort of looking at these beautiful little horses trotting across the grass.
You talk about it so kind of passionately and so involved, which is kind of rare for a screenwriter, because it's not often that you're even on set or even involved in that. So, but it feels like you were heavily involved in the process of making the film. Was that because of the kind of, again, it's a lot of it seems to be coming back to collaborations, finding a producer and a director who want to work in that creative way. And what was from that, what was the experience of kind of making the film in that way?
That was exactly it. It is all to do with the collaborations, and in this case it was to do with the friendship that formed between the three of us, between me, Cammy and Colin. We worked the screenplay out together. It's got my name on it, but every single draft of it came out of conversations that we had. Usually around about this time they were both working on Endeavour, the TV series. So wherever they were doing post-production on an Endeavour episode was where we would meet at the end of the working day. We'd get some pizza in, we'd just sit around for a few hours in someone else's space and sort of work on Go With All the Gift. We did that for getting on for a year. Actually, there was another producer involved at that stage, Dan McCullough, who dropped out later. And then Angus Lamont came on board. But really the nucleus was the three of us. And all of us felt like we owned the story jointly. Colin said to me once, making movies is the best thing in the world so long as everyone's making the same movie. And it really felt like we were, like we knew what we were doing, and we all jointly owned it. And I think that's the paradise version of being a screenwriter. There's definitely an inferno version of being a screenwriter where you hand in the draft and then sort of like kicked off into the long grass and awful things happen to the draft and then the film happens or doesn't happen. But you're right, I mean, usually the screenwriter is locked out of the production for the very good reason that I think a screenwriter on set is a pain in the arse.
I take offence. Speaking as a screenwriter.
They're an alternative focus. The director's trying to get the film made, and the screenwriter's sort of popping up and saying, "Oh, I didn't mean that." It didn't look like that. But it was never like that. I was there, and they did set recce. I was there. I met all of the heads of department. I was on set for about 2/3 of the total shoot. I'm in the film. Second zombie who gets his head blown off. That's me. Lynn's standing right next to me. Cammy thinks Lynn is laughing when my head explodes.
That would be our character for the zombie, though, isn't it? So she wouldn't have done that. Just about casting then, because one of the interesting things, kind of looking through the research and in the book, the ethnicities are kind of flipped to what they are in terms of the lead characters, and you know, often that's and often that decision is, like you say, made out of the screenwriter is not necessarily, you know, even consulted. So is that something that you were consulted about? Was that your idea, or how did that? Was it just through the process of casting and finding the right people, and that becomes a natural part of the process?
Well, again, we were all sort of on the same page throughout this. We were working under the auspices of the BFI. The BFI gave us both development money and production money, and the BFI is committed to diversity. And so, you know, we embraced that wholeheartedly. But we went in feeling, and I think it was the right choice. You don't get a diverse cast by ring fencing specific roles. You get them by auditioning as widely as you possibly can, and then making sure that your final choices cover as wide a field as possible. The way we got sending was amazing because we already had a shortlist. I was talking to Anna about this before. We had a shortlist of 6. Cammy and Colm watched 3,000 audition tapes. They did 500 live auditions, and they got it down to 6 girls. On the Friday before what they called the chemistry screenings, chemistry auditions, they were going to have all of the girls act opposite Gemma, act the same scene opposite Gemma, and just see what the chemistry was like between them. On the Friday before that was due to happen, Colin got a call from an old friend in Nottingham who said, "You really should come up and meet." Sorry, Northampton, not Nottingham. You need to come up and meet 2 more girls. And Colin said, "No, I don't, because we got our shortlist, and I'm going home to my family who I haven't seen for a long time." And the guy said, "You need to meet these girls as a favour to me. Come." Colin came, and one of the 2 girls was saying. So he called Cammy very sheepishly and said, "We need to add one more to the shortlist." And as soon as she and Gemma were in the same room, as soon as they started riffing off each other, which is obvious that it worked, that the relationship was believable. So you know, that she became our Melanie, and it was her first feature role. The only thing she'd done before that was a short in which she plays the younger sister of the lead. So she'd been on screen for like 2 minutes, and in our movie, as you saw, she's there for like 100 minutes or so. The total running time of 104. It's the film depends on her absolutely. So if she hadn't been up to it, we would have fallen apart. But she was brilliant.
Yeah, she is remarkable. The Hungries. There is our lead Hungry. What was it like to see that kind of, because you're writing and you have I guess you have an idea in your head of what they're going to look like. So what was it like to see them, and how did they match up what you were imagining when you wrote on the page? And then kind of the world of the film itself, you know, did it feel like the world, not necessarily exactly, because you know that's not necessarily possible, but did it feel like it was, you could see on the screen the world that you'd imagined on the page?
It was better than what was in my head, really. And I'd already had that experience many times in comics, because when you write a comic script, or when I write a comic script, I start by drawing an awful stick figure version of the script, and then it goes to an artist who does it properly. And you know, surprise, surprise, artists have better visual imaginations than writers. Are you going to pick me up on that?
No. I'll let that one slide, Mike.
So there were so many things that just worked better than the version of it that I had in my head. The makeup team took their inspiration from natural form, so they were making castings, rubber castings, PVC castings, from broccoli and cauliflower, tree bark, fungal growths and so on, and then they were sort of like sticking it to people's faces. So the organic look that the Hungries have, they look like they're sort of like the stuff growing from inside them, which is exactly the way they're meant to look. But the other thing that was incredibly striking was the scene where they're walking into London through streets that have become mature forests, you know, where the trees are sort of grown up through the buildings. They got that effect by, they sent Sam, who was one of the effects guys, to Chernobyl, to the village just outside Chernobyl, with a drone camera, he was second unit. It was just him and a drone camera, and he just did all those aerial shots. It's Seb sending this drone down the streets, and then he came home and none of the footage had come out because the settings were buggered. So he had to go back again and do the whole thing a second time. And it's one thing to read those scenes in the book, and it's a completely different thing to actually see it, because it makes some of the themes that are implicit in the book suddenly just like really in your face obvious. You know, the stuff about our stewardship of nature, the point that the world will get on perfectly well without us. If we were to become extinct tomorrow, the world wouldn't blink, it wouldn't skip a beat. All of all the spaces in the ecosystem that we currently fill up would be filled up with other things.
Perfectly into my kind of last question really before I kind of turn it out, which is about the themes. You know, I sort of said to you that I watched this film the other week, and it struck me as an absolutely perfect film for 2019 in terms of, you know, just literally what is in the news right now, you know, with British children, you know, orphaned and kind of left behind in Syria, and the government, you know, not bringing them back, kind of expatriating them, and kind of taking no responsibility for them, and just that theme of like how we deal with our children, how we think about children and what they're capable of and who they are. It felt so kind of resonant for now, and you know, and you sort of talking there about the kind of the planet and Extinction Rebellion and young people's attitudes to us as older people, you know, the older generation. And there's two lines at the end which are just absolutely, you know, kind of brilliant and chilling, which is that one of the, you know, she says, "Why should it be us who die for you?" Which is just like, yeah, you know, and that kind of, you know, reading the news was apt. And then when Melanie says, "It's not yours anymore," to Paddy's character, you know, it was just absolutely, yeah, this is right now, you know, and that felt like, you know, obviously intentionally in terms of you. So, you know, are those the things that you're interested in when you're telling the story about the planet and about kind of young people? Because it feels like a film about young people, which loads of films have young people in, but they're not really about young people. They're not about what young people can do and who they are and what they're going to end up being.
It's definitely a film about the sort of way in which our children inherit the earth, the way in which eventually we have to sort of step back and yield place to them. Going off on a quick tangent, I think it was yesterday, might have been the day before yesterday, broke the record for the number of new voters registered in a single day, 308,000, which I think is a good sign.
Awesome.
There are two myths that inform Girl with All the Gifts that kind of like in the back of my head when I was writing it. One's general and one's universal. One's specific and one's universal. The specific one is the Pandora myth. You know, Girl with All the Gifts literally translates the name Pandora. And obviously there's a sense in which Melanie's decision at the end is whether or not to open the box. And in the legend there is hope at the bottom of the box, and in the movie there is hope that the children will make a better job. You know, the world will be reborn, but it won't be reborn with us at the helm. It will be them. And then the general one is just, you know, that's a phase that every parent goes through. There's a point where you realise, you know, your kids aren't, you can't run their lives for them. The best thing you can do is step away and let them run their lives for themselves, because they're better adapted for the world as it is now than you are. Danny DeVito said in an interview one time, the thing about kids is if you raise them right, they'll leave you. I think, you know, it's glorious. It's a wonderful thing, however painful it is for the parents at the time.
Great. Thank you. A beautiful end to my part of the conversation. Has anybody got any questions from the floor? Yes, David.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask what you've got going on next.
I'm glad you asked. So I'm still doing this thing of turning short stories into novels. I did a short story for the PS Press anthology Weird Winter Tales, which is a story about a young boy coming of age in the Calder Valley in a few centuries' time. And I've turned that into a trilogy, working on the third number of the trilogy, and they're going to all come out back to back next year, which is exciting. It's post-apocalyptic territory again, but it's very different from Girl with All the Gifts. I've just started doing a comic for DC for the Hill House line, which is a line of books curated by Joe Hill, Stephen King's son. My book is called The Dollhouse Family. It's about a little girl who inherits a creepy 18th century dollhouse from an aged relative who's just died, and starts to talk to the dolls. The dolls are alive. At a certain point, they invite her into the dollhouse, and she gets to sort of meet them face to face. And then it turns out that the dollhouse is alive too and has an agenda of its own. So I've been doing that. We are very, very close to getting another movie going with exactly the same production team and same director as Girl with All the Gifts. It will be based on Fellside, the novel I did immediately after Girl with All the Gifts, which is a ghost story set in a women's prison on the principle of write what you know. So we have a director, we have a casting director, and we're very, very close to moving on that. Just keeping my fingers crossed that nothing goes wrong with it.
I'll look out for it all.
Sorry?
I said I'll look out for it all.
Thank you. Yeah, Kieran?
You talked about your relationship with the director on the film and how you were very involved in the production. In comparison to that, on the comics you've worked on, how do you like to manage your relationship with the artist?
That's a good question, and it's a kind of a complicated one because it does depend on the artist. It took me a long while to realise that if you specify too much for the artist, then basically you're just tying his or her hands behind their back. The only comic script I'd seen when I started writing comics was the script for Watchmen 1, because it was in the back of the trade paperback collection of Watchmen. So I thought everybody wrote comics like Alan Moore. And they don't, for the simple reason that Alan Moore is Alan Moore and the rest of us are not. The art direction for that first panel, which is just the smiley badge with the blood on it, runs to about 1,000 words. It's a page and a half of art direction. So I get looser and looser as I work with an artist over time. So with Peter and I have now done over 150 comics together. When I write a script for Peter, it's the opening stage in a negotiation. He takes the script as an invitation to treat. And I'm perfectly happy with that because his instincts are really good and he knows what I'm trying to do often better than I do. There's a scene in Lucifer, I don't know anybody if you've read Lucifer, where we meet Christopher Rudd, who's a guy who's gone to hell because he murdered a child. And there's a 3-page sequence where you get that backstory. He finds out his wife is having an affair, he goes into a berserk rage and runs this kid through with a sword. It was the kid's dad who was having an affair with his wife. So he's in hell and he recognises that this is where he belongs and he's never going to leave it. And I wrote that as 3 regular comic pages with 5 or 6 panels on each. And Peter said, that's not the way to do it because he's thinking about this every moment of every day. He's reliving those events again and again and again. So let's not have 5 panels on a page, let's have 100. And he did these 3 pages with lots and lots of tiny insert panels that just have the same visual motifs running through them again and again. But I have to admit, when I start out with an artist, I script tight, I script very, very prescriptively, and then I figure it out as I go along. Generally speaking, like I said, the artist has got a better visual imagination than I have, and so I'll learn to trust them, but it's a process.
So do you kind of script it, then send it off, and then it's done, or is there like back and forth?
There's a lot of back and forth, yeah. And if the editor's doing their job, there's a lot of back and forth. I have worked on books where I didn't have any direct contact with the artist because the editor sucked. At the moment on Dollhouse Family, Peter is doing layouts and Vince Locke is doing pencils, then inks. We've got Christiane Peter on art, on colour, and we've got Todd Klein lettering, and at every stage of the process we're all yakking away about it. So it's a very organic way to create comic book stories, but it does depend on the editor being good, because the editor's got to be the linchpin in all of those communications.
At the back, yeah, Carl?
Yeah, I just wondered, you were saying while you were teaching your wife and you were reading comics, I just wondered, obviously time period, what they were, and also how do you feel about British comic books at the moment, obviously in the 70s and 80s, Smiths was inundated with stuff. Like at the moment, there's only 2000 AD, Beano's annual. Do you see like a boom period coming back, obviously, with the Marvel films? But
what was the first part of the
just
question?
asking about the books you were reading just before you got into actually writing for
Oh, so the stuff that was my influences. So I was really lucky. I started writing for comics around about the time of what's come to be called the British Invasion, or sometimes the first British Invasion. All the American publishers thought that this was a tiny island full of Alan Moores. So they sent editors over with butterfly nets to catch writers. And that was when I came into the field. So I was sort of riding on the shoulders of those guys, and they were my direct influences. Neil, most obviously. I mean, if you look at the first 4 issues of Lucifer, that's me pastiching Neil. I don't become me until Born with the Dead, the issue that introduces Elaine Belloc. That's the first time sort of recognisably a bit different than the Sandman formula. But I literally learned to write comics by copying what Neil was doing, and what Alan Moore was doing, although that was not always so successful, because Alan is Alan. I never imitated Grant, but I think Grant is a genius. I think Doom Patrol is probably the best superhero comic that's ever existed. I think Animal Man and We Three did extraordinary things. So he's always been in the back of my head. So those were the things I was reading. I was reading everything that came out of Vertigo, but anything that those guys did particularly. I'm much less knowledgeable about what's happening now, which is a disturbing thing to have to admit. I don't read many comics at the moment. I read a lot of French bande dessinée. David Beauchamp, Johan Svar, who does The Rabbi's Cat, Philemon, old Lucky Luke and Asterix, stuff like that. But I don't read much British and American stuff, which is a bad thing, because I think it's dangerous not to be a consumer of the thing that you're creating, because there's a conversation that's going on in any genre, in any medium. There's a conversation, and if you're not part of the conversation, the chances are that you're drifting away in ways that can be quite deleterious.
Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else?
I just wondered
hang on.
That was a great quote, because it immediately made me think of various people I know who write poetry, and how I sometimes want to say what you just said. I want to say things. So thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome. I get royalties when you say it. Okay, Jeff.
I just wondered how your experience of writing comics has changed with better communication, because I guess there's more opportunities. You can better see what the artist is doing now through a lot of art is generated electronically anyway.
Yeah.
And scans are obviously better. I just wondered if that had changed the way you work.
Oh my God, in so many ways. Well, when I started writing comics, I had to send my scripts by fax. So I had to phone Shelley or Lisa and say, there's a script coming through, and then I had to sort of go to a print shop and feed them through one page at a time, and somewhere in the DC building a printer would spit out a script. And sometimes they'd get to it in time, sometimes they wouldn't, or it would go to the wrong printer. And artists used to have to physically send pages by courier, whereas now everything's sort of like instantaneously sent by as an attachment or via a file transfer service. But I think also the digital revolution has changed the way comic art is produced, completely changed it. Peter is fully digital now. He had surgery on his hand a few years ago, and he doesn't have the strength or the stability in his wrist that he used to have. So he works on a Cintiq. His studio looks like the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. He has 5 or 6 different monitors. One of them is just a TV that's often showing crappy old 60s dramas. The rest are actually things screens on which he sort of puts his work in progress. He flings stuff backwards and forwards. Every line can be taken off or adjusted once it's on the page. Nothing is final until he says it's final. It's incredibly versatile. It gives him an enormous amount of control, which he could never have had if he was working on paper. Some artists hated that. When we went over to America for the Fabletown convention, Mark Buckingham went to Peter's house, and Peter said, "You have to try the Cintiq." So Mark sat at the Cintiq and did a few sketches, sat there for an hour or so, got up and said, "That's amazing, and I never want to see it again." Yeah, he's still committed to ink. But yeah, it's changed. It's changed every creative medium, I think, but in good ways.
Well, I hope that we see you again. That was a real honour and really enjoyable. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your experience and expertise with us. That was great, and hopefully everyone else enjoyed it as much as I did. But yeah, let's please thank our guests.